The Dragonback Series by Timothy Zahn. Book 2. Dragon and Soldier. Chapter 28. "Sorry, lad," Uncle Verge said, his voice as quiet and apologetic and sincere as a professional fundraiser. "I'm afraid the Shamshire mercenaries keep pretty sloppy records of their competitors' aircraft. There isn't any way we're going to be able to trace those Gin 90s from this." "Uh-huh," Jack said, gazing across the table with a fascinated repugnance as he watched Dracos tearing into his fourth soup bowl full of hamburger, tuna fish, chocolate sauce, and motor oil. It wasn't that he couldn't understand the dragon's hunger. After all, Dracos hadn't had much to eat for the past 3 weeks. But the thought of that particular food combination still set Jack's own taste buds screaming for cover. "So that's it, huh?" "That's it," Uncle Verge confirmed. "And if I may say so, you might recall that I thought the idea was doomed idiocy from the start. So now, can we get on with a proper job of saving Dracos's people?" "By which you mean turning him over to the Star Force?" Jack suggested. Dracos looked up, his long tongue flicking a bit of tuna fish out of one corner of his snout.
"We cannot do that, Jack,"
he protested.
"It is too dangerous."
"Relax," Jack said, taking a sip of his fizzy soda. Yes, Uncle Verge had sounded quiet and apologetic and sincere, all right. Unfortunately for him, Jack had heard that sort of tone of voice before. Many times before. "You know, Dracos, for being such a clever Kada poet warrior, you're kind of slow on the uptake sometimes." The dragon's neck arched warningly.
"What do you mean?"
he asked, his voice ominous. "Relax," Jack hastened to reassure him. Apparently, the dragon wasn't in a mood for joking. "Watch and learn." He cleared his throat. "Okay, Uncle Verge," he said. "So we don't have anything on the Gin 90s. What interesting tidbits did you happen to find in the Shamshir data?" "You only asked for the Gin 90 information," Uncle Verge reminded him. "I know what I asked for," Jack said firmly. "Quit stalling. What did you find?" There was a moment of sulky silence. "There's one small piece that might be considered interesting," Uncle Verge conceded at last. "But really, it's so minuscule that—" "I said quit stalling," Jack interrupted. "Give." "That's just an item about the Brumgas," Uncle Verge groused. "Remember how you ran into a Brumga on Iota Clestes at the site of Dracos's crash?" "Like I'd forget," Jack said with a grimace. If Dracos hadn't used Jack's Tangler gun on the big alien, both he and the dragon would have wound up very dead. "And Lieutenant Q-Ball had a couple of his staff, too, hanging around looking ugly," he added. So, at least from the Shamshire data," Uncle Verge said grudgingly, "it looks like all the Brumgas and the various mercenary forces come from the same place." Jack sat up a little straighter. "What do you mean, the same place?" he asked. "The same city? Same province?" Uncle Verge sighed audibly. "Same dealer." Dracos's neck was still arched.
"What do you mean by dealer?"
he asked. "I'm not sure," Jack said grimly, "but I can guess. Are you talking about a slave dealer, Uncle Verge?" "Well, of course, mercenaries are considered skilled labor," Uncle Verge hedged. "And Brumga law isn't quite, shall we say, up to internal standards, and, well—"
"They deal in slavery!"
Dracos cut him off. Uncle Verge sighed again. Yes." Dracos hissed like he had a bad taste in his mouth, his neck crest stiffer than Jack had ever seen it.
"The indenture of children was barbaric enough,"
he bit out, his eyes glittering like lasers filtered through a pair of emeralds.
"But for intelligent beings to be owned like animals—"
"Easy, pal, easy," Jack said hastily, holding up his hands. "Don't get mad at me, or the Internos government for that matter. Like I've told you before, we humans aren't in charge of everything that happens out there.
What about the trade association?
Dracos demanded.
Are there not laws concerning such things?
There are some, sure, Jack said. But you can only enforce what you can see, and there are only so many Judge Paladins to go around. Come on, we're trying. Slowly, the crest softened.
I understand,
he murmured.
It is still an abomination.
No argument there, Jack agreed, shivering. He'd seen a group of slaves on one of the worlds he and Uncle Virgil had visited once. The memory of their haunted eyes and faces had stuck with him ever since. But in this case, it could be a useful abomination.
What do you mean?
Dracos asked. Nothing good, Uncle Verge cut in. You can wager your teeth and tail on that. Jack, look, lad. We need to find those mercenaries, Uncle Verge, Jack said. And since we aren't having any luck tracing their fighters, maybe we can trace their personnel. And how do you intend to do that? Uncle Verge demanded. How do you expect to get close enough to a Brumga slave lord to get a look at his records, eh?
Perhaps as a soldier for hire,
Draco suggested. Forget it, Jack said firmly. I'm not cut out to be a soldier.
You did not do badly,
Draco said.
Do not forget that you were not properly trained or led, and you were certainly not among true warriors.
I appreciate the vote of confidence, Jack said dryly, but I think we'll find a different way in, if it's all the same to you.
That is your option,
Draco said.
Still, whether you accept it or not, you are showing great progress in living by a warrior's ethic.
Jack snorted gently. I don't know how you figure that one.
You told Allison not to risk coming back for you,
Dracos reminded him.
That showed your consideration of others' safety before your own.
Jack felt his lip twist. Well, actually, no, it didn't. I just didn't want her bringing the Shamshir chase ships back my direction. Dracos' tail arched.
Truly?
Jack shrugged. Sorry. Uncle Verge laughed out loud. That's my boy, he said smugly. See there, Dracos, old snake. Jack's not as easily corrupted by this warrior ethic nonsense as you'd like to think.
Perhaps,
Draco said, his eyes seeming to measure Jack.
Perhaps it is merely a path that will require many small steps. Do not forget he did return to rescue the others.
Only because you pressured him, I'd wager, Uncle Verge said. Like, I suppose you also pressured him into wrecking that Doblite mine for no good reason.
I suggested nothing of the sort,
Dracos protested.
Furthermore, there was a good reason. The Agri had become virtual prisoners of the Shamshir mercenaries they had hired. From all appearances, the Parapins were in the same situation with the Wynyard's Edge.
And whose fault was that? Uncle Verge shot back. Theirs, that's whose.
Is it a fault to work to create a source of profit only to have it stolen away?
Dracos countered. Of course not, Jack put in. That's as bad as a bunch of mercenaries trying to steal someone else's property and having a kid come along and con it right out from under them. The budding argument stopped dead on its rails. What did you say? Uncle Verge demanded suspiciously.
Yes,
Draco seconded.
What did you mean?
Jack smiled. Yes, his relationship with Dracos was going to change his relationship with Uncle Verge. Maybe it would indeed change it forever, the way he'd wondered and worried about earlier as he stood alone in the darkness of the forest. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe the three of them together were going to hammer themselves into a better team than he'd ever thought they could be. Certainly a better team than he'd ever dared to hope. Remember, Uncle Verge, when we were leaving Sunright, you said that I didn't do things halfway, he said.
Well, as a matter of fact,
The thin young man's name was Louis, and he was red-faced and panting as he lugged the 2 footlockers through the door and into the middle of the rundown hotel room.
okay,
He puffed, dropping the end of the first footlocker onto the floor with a thud.
yours,
He dropped the second footlocker with an equally loud thud.
his.
You're sure it's the right one? Allison Cana asked, glancing both ways down the hallway before closing the door behind him.
The name tag says Jack Montana in big letters, Louis pointed out. I deserve a bonus for this one, kiddo.
What, for lugging and handling charges? Allison countered scornfully. Come on, be real. The way I hear it, the Wynyard's Edge was pulling off Sunrise so fast the whole base was running in 10 directions at once. You could have loaded one of their own Lynxes with goodies and flown it out without anyone noticing.
Busy or not, they still had guns, Louis said pointedly.
And you could con the bullets right out of them, Allison said. It was a stroll in the backyard compost heap, and you know it.
Louis shook his head. You're the cheapest kid with a nickel I've ever seen, he grumbled.
Blame it on my upbringing, Allison said. You'll get your usual fee by the usual channels. A pleasure doing business with you.
Yeah, I'm sure, Louis said, gazing her direction. How about information? You pay anything for information?
What kind of information? Allison asked.
Oh, you know, Louis said, waving a hand vaguely around. I hear stories, listen to rumors, that sort of thing.
Rumors aren't usually worth much.
The ones I listen to are, Louis reassured her. An extra 500?
100.
300.
Allison studied his face. All right, 300. Let's hear it.
Louis lowered his voice. You know that big mine explosion? The one that got both the Shamshire and the Wynyard's Edge to cancel their contracts with the locals and pull out?
I was there when Montana blew it, Allison said dryly. Lit up the sky for miles. You'd have to have been more than just a colorful commentary on the event.
Oh, I've got more, Louis promised with a sly smile. Turns out our boy Montana was either very, very stupid or very, very clever. When the fires finally went out and the Agri got busy clearing away the wreckage they found, what was left of the transport sitting flat square on top of the mine shaft.
Okay, Allison said, frowning.
So, Louis echoed. Oh, come on, girl. You just finished playing soldier. Don't you remember anything about troop transport design?
I'm too tired for games, Louis, Allison said patiently. Just spill it.
Troop transports, he said in a tone like someone lecturing a small child. They carry soldiers onto battlefields where people will be shooting at you from below.
Allison frowned. You're talking about armor plating?
See, Louis said, looking pleased. You did learn something. Yes, I'm talking about at least 20 inches of high-dense cerametal on the underside of every modern troop transport. With the model of Lynx, it's closer to 30 inches.
And then, suddenly, Allison got it. The mine shaft didn't collapse.
Bingo, Louis said, looking extremely pleased with himself. And with the Mercs already having canceled their contracts, there's no way for them to reverse themselves and get their hooks into the locals again. Like I said, either really stupid or really clever.
In her mind's eye, Allison could see that last look on Jack Montana's face. The look he'd been giving the Shamshire computer as he sent her back to their transport with the pilot code. Not stupid, she murmured. Clever.
Whichever, Louis said. Worth that extra 300?
I suppose, Allison said, keeping her voice casual. I'll send a note about it.
Yeah, Louis said. Well, have fun with your new stuff and let me know whenever I can be of service. Always happy to work with you.
As long as the money's good, Allison suggested.
Your money's always good, Louis said with another sly smile. See ya, kiddo.
Turning, he left the room. Allison went to the door and made sure it was locked. Then she returned to the 2 footlockers. Ignoring her own for the moment, she knew what was in that one after all. She knelt down beside Jack's. So Jack Montana had pulled a fast one there at the end. On her and on everyone else. He'd conned both sets of mercenaries into pulling out, thinking the mine they both wanted was permanently ruined, and left matters for the Agri and Parapins to work out between themselves. Clever, all right. And it made Jack an even more interesting puzzle than she'd thought when she'd hired Louis to sneak his footlocker out of the Edge camp. The footlocker was, of course, locked, but that wouldn't be a problem. Squeezing at the base of her left hand forefinger, she slid out the plastic lockpick that had been surgically implanted beneath the fingernail. She hadn't told Jack about this little gem, naturally. He would have wanted to know how a simple indentured teenager could afford this kind of high-tech gimmick, or what she would even have wanted with it in the first place. Instead, she'd spun him that bogus story about having dug her handcuffs out from under the shelving of the Shamshir storage hut. Now, it seemed, Jack hadn't been entirely honest with her either, because Allison listened to stories too. And one of the most interesting ones recently concerned an incident a month ago aboard a liner called the Star of Wonder, an incident centering on a high-level power struggle between Cornelius Braxton and his board director, Arthur Nevelin, for control of the huge megacorporation Braxton Universis. And right in the middle of that struggle had been a boy named Jack, a boy who was reported to have an uncle named Virgil, like the Uncle Verge Jack had called to when the spaceship had shown up and shot those Shamshir fighters off her back. Trouble was, the name of the kid on the Star of Wonder hadn't been Jack Montana. It had been Jack Morgan. Was Jack Montana really Jack Morgan? Very possible. Maybe there would be something in this footlocker that would confirm that. Maybe there would be other interesting items as well. And if so, there were people out there who would pay money for that information. A great deal of money. Slipping the tip of her lockpick into the lock, she set to work.
Thus ends the second book in the Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn, Dragon and Soldier. Join us next time as we start Book 3, Dragon and Slave.